Welcome back. David Kaye, Baylor general manager, which there's never been. You're the first general manager.
Well, it's NIL General Manager.
NIL General Manager,
yes,
but yes.
First. We are building the ship as it flies or as it sails or however you want to say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Congratulations on the new gig. You've been at Baylor a very long time. And you've
almost 15 years.
Yeah. And you have worn a lot of different hats along the way. This one, though, is completely new. In that, this is a new world. And you were kind of doing all this stuff anyway, right?
Yeah, I really got involved in NIL around January of 23. And this has evolved. And so I've already been in this role as far as kind of managing the relations with the collective and the NIL Advisory Council and having conversations with athletes. That really picked up in November when our NIL Advisory Council said we're going to change the way we do football. It was, hey, if we're going to retain some guys, we need to change our model. And you had to have one-on-one conversations at that point with every player who could return. And so that's where this really evolved from. And that's where the role really grew, was out of that, was, hey, we're allowed to present you and make you aware of opportunities that are available to you. We can't negotiate them. We can't make them happen, but we can help with the facilitation and we can make you aware of them. And so that's what happened out of that, was just a lot of meetings with football players, football student athletes about what opportunities were going to be available to them the next year. And then that's morphed, and now it's through other sports as well.
Kind of have a two-part question. I mean, first of all, were you interested in NIL from the beginning, or is this something like it's just part of the job, like this is what I do, this is what you do? Because I would imagine there's got to be some part of you that's intrigued by just the ins and outs of it and getting to learn that. So how much of that was, were you just sort of interested in the idea of NIL and learning more about it and fleshing that out?
Yeah, I think I was always interested in it. It's not something that I ever went and said, hey, I want to be involved in NIL. It just kind of came about that they needed someone to do it at a certain point, and I had some availability to do it. And so that just really was like, hey, we'd like you to step in and help with this. And it worked out really well, and things started trending in the right direction, and then it became my responsibility. So I'm excited about it. I love that every day is different. Things change, and you form a game plan, and then the next week some new guidance comes out from the NCAA and you have to shift. That's really exciting to me about you don't know what each day is going to look like. It's good and bad, but I really enjoy that part of it. And I enjoy trying to communicate with athletes, and sometimes you deal with agents even, but just have an open communication where people leave feeling like, hey, they were really transparent. I understand it at Baylor better than anywhere else. When I visit with recruits, that's up front. I say, I want you to leave here feeling like we were more transparent with you about the way we do NIL than anywhere else, and that you don't have any questions left when you leave. Because there's so much ambiguity in the space, and people don't know how it all works.
Yeah, we'll probably get into some of that ambiguity and all of that. But, yeah, I mean, if you clearly like challenges, so this is a challenge, and that excites you more so than interest in NIL specifically, yeah.
Well, and I am interested in NIL. I want to be clear on that. But, for 13 years I was a sports information director, and that was a little more redundant. I really enjoyed that part of it. I enjoyed the relationships, especially with the media. But this has been kind of different in that, hey, I had to come in and kind of learn this on the fly and adapt every day different approaches. And with communications as a sports information director, there's not much innovation there.
Right.
So I've really enjoyed that part of it, trying to get everything organized, trying to be strategic, and just working with our NIL Advisory Council. And I can't say enough good things about John Passavant, the CEO of GXG. We talk every day, multiple times. He's been a tremendous partner in the space.
And that's a big deal, because I think early on that there were some just you go around the country and there were some good NIL collectives that had a good idea of how they're going to do things, and some I think that were kind of already collectives that just got to come into the light and take the dark curtains off their windows, so to speak, and then there were some that were just a bunch of drunken rich guys. They're let's see who we can get. Let's go. He'll tell the coach, you hear it, any money you want, all right, another scotch. Just tell us how to write the check, which is not really, I'm sure it's great for the guy who gets the money, except it's not really productive for either side, in that you're not really doing anything. But having an NIL collective that knows what it's doing, and obviously, went through a first year or so of we're just inventing this right now, but to see them kind of grow in the space, what have you seen from, the side of like GXG at the beginning and now like how it's morphed into with what they've been able to figure out? Like, because again, there was no playbook for this at all.
Well, and one big thing that changed was guidance changed to where we could have more involvement with them. Like, really, the game changer was when the NCAA said you can help with fundraising. Like, that makes all the difference. And I want to shout out our university advancement: Greg Davis, Nick Florence, Jake Baskin, Gina French, Toby Baldwin, Barnett. Like, they've been incredible in visiting with our donors and helping to get funding into GXG, because we are able to go to them and say, we'd like you to give to GXG. And so that was the real game changer with NIL. So I know people look at Baylor NIL and say, maybe we were a little slow to start. I think we were very intentional. We were conservative. We wanted to be sure we were doing it the right way, and I think that's paid off. I think, we talk about the ambiguity, and it doesn't behoove us to share all of our information publicly. And I know that's not what people want to hear, but if people hear that Baylor football has X amount in NIL or Baylor basketball has X amount in NIL, well, coaches we're competing against are going to go to their donors and their athletic directors and their fundraisers and say, if I'm going to compete with Baylor, I need that. And so we're better off with that information not being out there. It gives us a competitive advantage if we're doing more than other collectives. It doesn't really have much benefit other than just people are curious. And so I would say, our advisory council knows how much everything is going on. The collective knows. And so people who want to have those conversations with them can. But we have been very intentional about not making a huge deal about, hey, these numbers are out there and this is what it is.
You can call that the sliced bread rule.
Yeah, well, and listen, we've talked to people there who said that whole thing was completely made up.
But again, I think the SEC reacted as a whole to that message board post from sliced bread as like, and they, Nick Saban immediately went on like, hey, they spent all this money in there, and he didn't care that it didn't matter to him. And talking to that donor group, it wasn't true. And I'm not trying to impeach his credibility, but like, he had to get out in front of that somehow and be like, look, if this is even close to true, you guys have to step up. And then you even have to that was even at the time where you had to pretend like NIL is real, but it's not a thing, that was the real ambiguity right there, where you guys had to acknowledge it but pretend like you weren't involved.
And that was the hardest part, was like, at the end of the day, people know this is the Baylor collective, right? Mm-hmm. So their reputation really is our reputation. Mm-hmm. So we need to make sure, and that's where the alignment's been so important. Like, you've seen some of these things at other schools. I won't name any names, but where
you go ahead and name names you want to.
You've seen some things where it gets ugly, where a kid is completely taken advantage of, misled, and it reflects really poorly on the school. So that's where it's like, it's been so great to have a relationship with GXG where we know what they're doing, we're aligned, and they're not doing anything crazy that's going to embarrass Baylor.
How does the sort of process work now? We hear, just the hyperbole is like an athlete just walks in and demands $1 million, right? It's not that simple, obviously. How would you describe the process, especially with your involvement now, and how all of that sort of works hand in hand?
So, I've seen a lot of people upset, and I've talked to some people upset about, like, they should be choosing to come to Baylor because it's world-class education and great and all those things are true. But I would describe it the same way as anyone seeking an athletic or an academic scholarship. Like, when you're making your decision what college to go to, you're going to know all the information as far as what the finances are of it. And so why shouldn't student athletes be able to know what NIL is available to you if you go to a certain school? I actually ended up on a call with a congressman a few months ago where I was saying it would really help us if there was federal legislation that allowed collectives to make offers to recruits in writing during their visits, because what was happening is that collectives would just throw out numbers. And so we'd have a kid come in on a visit and, we'd talk about NIL and they'd say, yeah, I was at this collective and they said they could get me $100,000. And you say, okay, well, is that $100,000 right when you get there? Is that $100,000 over your 4-year career? Is that an exclusive deal or a non-exclusive deal? Meaning, if it's an exclusive deal, any other NIL deals you do pay back the collective, and that's the way some do it. And they didn't have any of those answers. And it's just unfair to the kid because it's just a crazy number. So fortunately, that was something nice that happened with one of the lawsuits, is that the collectives can provide term sheets to recruits and show them what would be available to them. And so that's the way it works. The NIL Advisory Council works with the collective. They set an amount, they put together a term sheet, and it gets shown to a recruit when they're on their visit. And they know, if I come to Baylor, this is what's available to me. and it's very transparent. It's very above board. It's not the craziness of, oh, well, I need $1 million or I'm not coming. I mean, honestly, that's not the kind of kid we want. And so every recruit conversation I have, we don't want NIL to be the reason you don't come here. We want to make sure that you're a great fit for Baylor and Baylor's a great fit for you and you fit the team. And at the end of the day, if all those things align, we don't want NIL to be a reason you don't come here. But if you're only coming here because of NIL, we're setting ourselves up for failure.
I think everybody who does that, we got to go, okay, this kid says I'm a quarterback, I'm worth $2 million because, Bryce Young was worth $2 million. You're like, all right, well, best of luck. I'm sure somebody's out there desperate enough for you, but at the end of it, you're probably not going to win with kids like again, you're also not going to be able to budget like that because then what are you doing? You're going back like, oh, well, this kid needs $2 million. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, defensive tackles are going for $1.5 million. So we got to make sure that we get the $1.5 million defensive tackles and not the 300,000 defensive tackles that are probably just as good.
And that's where I think eventually this hopefully comes in house in some form. And there are some kind of collectively bargained caps or whatever it is where you do have a finite number and you say, okay, you could treat it almost like I hate to use the word pro because it is still college, but almost like a pro model of, okay, we have to decide how much do we want to allot to the quarterback room or the wide receiver room and work from there. And right now, because it's, everyone's playing with ambiguous numbers and everyone thinks we could just go raise more money, it's really hard to figure that kind of thing out. So that's been a real challenge. And so that's kind of where I come in, is communicating between the coaches and the collective and making sure we're all on the same page and making sure we're thinking around the corner about, okay, if the collective does this for this student athlete, what are the ripple effects of that? Mm-hmm. Because if you think that these guys aren't going to occasionally talk and share numbers, like you're setting yourself up again for failure. Like you have to accept that there's going to be some conversation. Now, all of our collective contracts that GXG does, they all have confidentiality clauses in there. But you'd be pretty naive to think that nothing ever gets shared.
Well, especially for a 20-year-old kid.
Like 17, 18-year-old.
Yeah, 17-year-old. Yeah.
And that's part of the conversation we have with them, though, is like, this is the business side of it now. Mm-hmm. It is. I don't go around the hallway asking my coworkers how much they're earning, and you shouldn't be doing that either. We have to treat it a little bit like a business on this side of it.
Yeah, for sure. What's it like I remember, I guess it was maybe Sam Kahn's article here recently when he talked about Dave Aranda. There was an anecdote about him, like, I got to go learn about NIL, and I guess they were passing.
He's going to the Cardinals, right?
Yeah, it was the coach,
like how to build a roster.
Yeah, he was going to meet with the Cardinals. It was at Big 12 meetings, I guess that's what it was. And Dave was on his way out because he had to go meet with some Cardinals front office people to figure out how salaries work and salary caps and things like that. What are those conversations like right now with coaches, and just how interesting is that to be in that space, knowing that's not really what they signed up for, but that's part of the job now?
I think any coach would tell you that's part of the job now. Yeah. And so everyone trying to learn on the fly a little bit, but you also have to stay compliant. Like, coaches can't set budgets and say, I want to use this much on this player. Like, that's against the rules.
Yeah, so could you kind of, I wouldn't have thought about that. So you got to just explain what they're allowed to be a part of and what they're not allowed to be a part of.
That's where you just kind of have to talk in hypotheticals and, hey, I've heard quarterback recruits, 4-star quarterback recruits are getting offers for this much. We share that information. Gotcha. Hey, we've heard this is what's happening. But you can't get into specifics on a particular student athlete and say, this student athlete needs this much to come here. Like, that's where it's really a challenge. And I think eventually that'll get cleared up and it'll be more straightforward and more just, this is your budget, this is what you're working with. And then the coaches do get to decide at that point. When that eventually comes in-house, I think coaches will essentially have a general manager on each sport who's kind of allocating and saying, okay, this is how much we want to allot. And, maybe then the numbers become more public, and I think numbers becoming more public might actually rein some of this stuff in because, you deal with people who are incentivized to inflate numbers.
Oh, yeah.
There was something that came out on social media a few days ago where it was, lined up $2 million of NIL deals. Well, that doesn't mean that the collective is giving $2 million. I'm not saying that couldn't be the case, but that could mean a lot of other things.
Well, the agent he's definitely that guy has an agent, right? So like his agent can make all kind of deals that he wants, and the collective may only be responsible for part of that. I think the other thing that comes in, if you're a collective and you've got donors giving, and they find out that like this guy is getting $2 million, well, a lot of my donors be like, well, if we're paying him $2 million and we lose in the first round of the tournament, I'm going to not maybe do that because I don't think it's worth it anymore. And then that hurts everything else, right?
Yeah, you really don't want people looking at dollar signs out there.
Yeah.
Like that's a challenge. But yeah, I think it's just best in general if the donors aren't sitting there thinking my money is going to that athlete. That's not the intent of it. That's not the way it should be. I would hope that if nothing else, they've learned that through our advisory council and through John at GXG, like they're being very intentional about how they do everything. And you're not seeing any craziness of Baylor paid a guy, not Baylor, GXG paid a guy $100,000 and a week later he was in the transfer portal. Like they're being very intentional about that. And there are ways to be strategic. You know, I have to be careful how much I share because we don't want to give up anything that gives our collective or Baylor a competitive advantage. But there are ways to be intentional about that. But there's also the challenge of the NCAA rules, which literally this morning I sat down with our compliance office and went over some new guidance that came out. So you have to be adaptable, and just because something is permissible today doesn't mean it will tomorrow. And you also have to think through, like, that's where coaches preparing for the day when coaches do get to decide who gets how much.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with what the rules are. Like in some cases, there are no rules, and state by state, and it's all just very confusing of where things kind of fall. So yeah, you almost have to have like a law, degree on the side. Kind of like when we talk about all these various issues now, there's just so many different components to it. So. Can you just, I guess, get into sort of for folks who see the announcement about, you and the promotion and the others that are going to be involved in this, it's just sort of what all this means and how that blossoms out this part of the athletic department and therefore, benefits athletics overall.
Yeah, this is really, I think, the start of a larger unit, but we've hired Haneen Rashwan. She was assistant director of NIL at Oklahoma State. She did a phenomenal job there. She's only 1 year out of college, but she was on their brand squad and was the president of it while she was a senior in their business school, and they really built comprehensive NIL programming for their student athletes. And what I mean by that is like helping to teach them how to go and negotiate with brands to get deals. How to build their brand on social media to make themselves more valuable, all of that. So those are sort of the lines that have been drawn, and obviously there's crossover, but Haneen is going to really work on building out our programming.
Can she come here? Teach me about TikTok?
We're going to keep her plenty busy, okay? But yeah, so she's going to handle the NIL programming side of it, and then I'll handle the recruit visits, talking to coaches, talking to the advisory council, talking to John Passavant on a daily basis, all those kind of things. So that's sort of the general parameters, but there's lots of crossover. And I'd be naive to sit here and tell you I know exactly where this is going. Like things are changing rapidly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there will eventually be more members of a staff on an NIL staff. And if you're not building out an NIL unit, you're kind of putting yourself behind for when that day comes.
Is this eventually going to be good for sports not called football and basketball? I mean, it already kind of is in that, especially like for baseball and softball. I mean, you and I were talking before about trading cards. That's a sport that already lends itself to it, and that's I think was for baseball athletes is probably going to be even a more attractive thing too. I talking to Mitch Thompson about like where you have to be in the NL world in a non-revenue sport in like schools that happen to have like Georgia has like a group of 5 baseball players that turn out to be best friends and all have a bunch of money. And they're like, okay, well, football's taken care of. Mm-hmm. I can only worry about baseball. If you don't happen to be one of those schools, then like you're kind of behind the 8 ball. But with House versus NCAA coming down and maybe some scholarships things changing and being able to offer full scholarships to sports that have never had them, or at least not in modern memory, which has always been the dumbest rule to me in the world. I don't know how you get by in any sport with 11 scholarships on a team that has 30 people on it.
Got that extra 0.7 in there too. Don't forget about the 0.7.
Yeah. Those books for those kids that parents are in a slightly higher tax bracket but still probably feeling it. Are those things could potentially be better? That they'll have NIL opportunities and.
I think there's no doubt that NIL is better for student athletes. Mm-hmm. Like it is in general, it's not making anything worse for anyone on the student athlete side. I think equivalency sports, it can help with covering the cost of tuition. Mm-hmm. Hopefully there's a time. I know that it causes all kinds of challenges and the financial times are getting really complicated, but I think there's a day coming where there's full scholarships possibly. And then, the trading cards is like the coolest thing. We just met with On It. They're doing the baseball and softball ones, about to get those to market. They're getting ahead of doing the football ones for next year. So I think those may be hitting the market in June or July. So that's a really cool thing. Like, we visit with recruits and show them the On It deal and say, this would have been cool just to be in a trading card set before. Now you get compensated for it. So you're getting royalties in the hundreds. And then if they choose you to do an autograph signing of it, you can make 4 figures on those. So I think there's tons of opportunity there. There's going to be things that grow, especially as things like the trading cards are successful. That'll lead to more opportunities. So would love for our fans to continue supporting those kind of things, because it gets money into our athletes' pockets, which is a good thing. Gets them a really cool product, and then it opens more opportunities down the road. But yeah, some of the coolest NIL deals we've had have been like through acrobatics and tumbling. So that's what I love about NIL, is that it's non-discriminatory. Anyone can get an NIL deal. It's about building your brand and getting and pursuing opportunities. There's a football player came to me and said he wants help getting a deal at the place he goes to get his dog washed. So just helped him a little bit with how you do that kind of thing. But that's
shoot a commercial and
we helped Dariana Littlepage Buggs with her raid deal. That was the coolest one I think we've done.
Now you got the double whammy with Jeremy Roach.
We'll be talking raid again. Don't worry.
Oh yeah, I bet so. Yeah.
But again, a little bit of a fine line. We can't negotiate on their behalf, but we
Right.
can help facilitate.
Yeah.
And so we helped Buggs a little bit with how you would negotiate something like that if you were wanting to negotiate it. Some athletes just choose to take the NIL deal that's offered to them. Someone to negotiate it, but it's great business skills for them to learn, whether they're using it for NIL or not. It's just for the long term a really good thing.
I haven't heard you mention parents yet in this, and I'm very curious on there. There's crazy helicopter parents out there for even the sweetest of kids, in the world, and I think that's probably complicated NIL world a little bit, or helicopter salespeople who've been kind of contracted to the family. But how have parents responded to this? When you have a conversation with a parent, what is the discussion like?
It varies. I had a football recruit visit maybe a couple weeks ago, and the mom, it was almost refreshing. She was like, I just don't want to hear any of this. This feels weird to me. And so I have to kind of enforce, no, this is legal, this is permissible, and this is just taking advantage of an opportunity that's available to you. So there's that, and then there's others who, see crazy things and just believe everything they hear. And that's what I'd tell anybody is don't believe everything you hear. There's people who are incentivized to lie.
Yeah.
And so, there's a little bit of a, hey, talk. I don't want to say talk in some sense, but explaining the reality of the situation to them. But really the goal in those NIL meetings when the parents are in there with the recruits is everyone feel good about it. That, hey, we understand how this works. And, if someone comes in with crazy ideas, well, hopefully we can explain the situation a little better to them and give them a little bit of the actual facts behind it instead of the wild speculation they hear. And honestly, that's been the case. I can't really remember anywhere I left going, that parent was crazy. They have no idea. Most of the people, I think, they have enough people around them that have told them some truths.
So, looking forward, obviously you'd love some sort of intervention. You'd love for the school to be directly involved, right? Is that number one? If you had the magic wand, David Kaye, and you could say, I have the power to make NIL the best, most streamlined, healthy for all involved, thing that it can be, where do you start and what would you like to see possibly happen over the next few years to make this a better process for everybody?
Well, I'll start by saying whatever I throw out there is probably not going to happen.
Okay, yeah, that's fair.
I think about this on an almost daily basis, all the different ways to try to solve something like this. I think in an ideal world, student athletes are compensated for the marketing value they bring to the university, right? And if there's a way to do that where it's a contract and there's basically a budget for each team, and I think each team should have a different budget. It shouldn't be equal because different sports bring different marketing value.
And you have that for everything else, right? Budgets for all sorts of other things. So.
Yeah, the science department might get more than English. That's kind of how things work. Yeah.
It's capitalism.
Yeah.
And so
USA.
So I think that's one thing is just ideally it comes in-house to where the schools are funding it through donations. But in that way, donations that came in, the schools could give some kind of benefit for it. That's one of the biggest challenges in NIL right now is that the school can't give any benefit. We can go to our donors and say, we'd love for you to give to GXG, but we cannot provide you any benefit for doing that. So coming in-house, that would change. And so then you could almost tie it to seating. You could tie it to the TV contracts. Lots of different ways to make that work. So I'd really personally, and I want to be clear, my personal opinion, not Baylor's opinion, I would love to see it come in house to where you knew there was this budget backstop. You had a budget you could work with, and you knew that money was going to be there. Whereas right now, that's a challenge. Now, we're going to make sure that GXG has what they need through going out to our donors and helping fundraise, but not everyone's able to do that. So I'd love to see it come in house that way, and then you're able to work within the constraints of a budget, and everyone knows what the budget is, and student athletes understand, okay, I'm getting this percentage of the budget, and this is what is required of me to get that. And this is what would lead to my contract being terminated. This is what would lead to it being fulfilled. Straightforward, a little more like, I don't want to say employment, but basically compensated for the marketing you bring.
And there's a way to do that. There is a way. And I think most athletes wouldn't want to be employees. In the classic sense of employment, like that I don't, and clearly the universities don't want that either, because that's a whole new ball of wax. But
think about what that would do to Baylor University having to support 550-ish more employees. I mean, that creates all kinds of challenges. And then you've got taxable benefits. Now, obviously, the gear you get to play in a game, that's for a working purpose. If it's working, you're not getting taxed on that. But having to figure out what's taxable, what's not, there's lots of hurdles there. So I think there is a middle ground that's probably not employment. It's a little short of that. Maybe it's collectively bargained. I don't know. There's a way to do it, and I trust that there's people working on it daily trying to find the right mix.
If there is that in-house and then the structure, then that allows maybe NIL, and again, this would not be a perfect system too. Yeah. To be when you facilitate an NIL deal, okay, we have this budget, now we're going to go talk to David, and he's going to tell you about, here are the, availabilities to you, here's who you talk to, they'll help you out. These are, this is our, I know you do this anyway. You have NCAA qualified agents that come in and talk to players that are draft eligible. And these are the agents that you should consider. And, here's a list of if this guy's called, he doesn't have your best interest at heart, those kind of things that you do to kind of protect them, as opposed to what NIL can be most places, which is let's just make sure that we get this kid the most money so that he comes here and not to the people we don't want him to go to.
And that's kind of one of the things that's a little bit tough right now is that, student athletes can have marketing agents. Well, in general, marketing contracts can provide about 20% to the agent as a facilitation fee. And yet pro contracts are 3 to 5%. And so, when I've visited with people who don't have an agent, I try to advise them on, hey, if an agent is trying to take 20% of your deal with your collective, they might be taking advantage of you. Yeah. That seems a little ridiculous when they maybe didn't even have a hand in getting you that deal. So that's one thing. I'm I'd love to see it get more professionalized that way. I want to be clear. I'm not advocating for pro sports, but I'd like to see it professionalized in the manner that's done, and just a little more above board, as far as not letting student athletes who've never dealt with this be taken advantage of. And that's another thing I find with parents is just a lot of them. It's just this is crazy to me. I've never heard any of this. It seems so weird that student athletes would be able to earn compensation now. And that'll change over time. People will get more and more used to it, but
I think a lot of people also don't know how much money is in. They hear it, but I think the cat got out of the bag when a coach made $10 million, or when that was going up, you're wait a minute, hold on, this has changed a little bit, and then the argument changes because then it couldn't be, well, there's no money in the budget for this, and well, there's money in the budget for this guy. That's just one guy, but they still don't know, you have to explain kind of the math of yes, there's a lot of money available to you, and this is why, and now it's legal, and because times have changed, right?
Yeah, and I mean, the TV contracts are really where college sports changed dramatically. You can look back at that and say when the TV money grew is when things really shifted. And so, listen, I understand there's people who still appreciate the old model of college sports where it was strictly for the love of the game and all of that. I can understand that. But what I would say to people is you don't have to like it. But if you don't have competitive NIL, then you really probably need to accept that you're not going to have competitive teams. Because I think if any of us were honest, if you were considering two different options and one was going to pay you and another wasn't, I mean, we all want to be paid for the work we do. I get paid for the work I do. So I think that's been a change, and I think people are getting more and more used to that of we need to have competitive NIL if we want to field competitive teams. And it's best for Baylor athletics to have competitive NIL because we need Baylor to be good. And it brings tons of value to the university, and it's uncertain times in college athletics. Like, we need to be competitive. And Baylor being competitive in sports just allows us to shine our light nationally, globally. It's, Jeremy Fudge, I'll listen to him talk about why it's important for Baylor athletics to be successful all day long because he just does such an amazing job explaining why it's good for the kingdom for Baylor athletics to be good at sports.
Was that a problem at Baylor before? Like I want to like I would say before, like 15, 20 years ago, where I think there was some leadership or people that were like higher up donors that just didn't care as much because it had been a bit of a not successful time for athletics, and they're just like, well, it's not that important for this. Like, do those things. I mean, Coach Taft was, famously says about like how hard it was to get a real weight room, for his team back in the day. And that's probably not exclusive to Baylor, but
I'd have a little bit of a hard time speaking to that. I mean, I came back to Baylor full time in 2009. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the start of the upswing.
Yeah.
Not to say, I mean, we won national championships in 2005. Okay, so there were national championships being won before that, but. I think there's probably people back then who didn't realize the value of being competitive and how much it could do. But I also think times have changed as well. Like back in 2005, some of our football games weren't on TV.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just things have changed so much to where being successful is that much more valuable. Whereas, in the really dark years, like, listen, when I was a student at Baylor, we rushed the field 3 times in my first 3 years, and those were our 3 Big 12 wins. Like, it was rough. So I think there's probably a time where people maybe didn't appreciate how much we needed to be competitive. Like I remember when we got the on-campus practice facility built, that was a game changer. Yeah. And now we're building a new one right outside of it. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm rambling, but I think there's an argument that people didn't understand how valuable it was back then. But I also think it's easy to say now.
Yeah,
when we weren't in those conversations.
Yeah, you've tasted it now, so now it's a different feeling than when you didn't really know what it tasted like before. Because I remember what the perception of Baylor was when I was growing up, and it was not great, as you well know. And to see how far it's come is just never would have thought that when I was younger to where it is now. And so its success breeds people wanting to be a part of that, and make sure that it continues. And so it's I still don't think that. And I don't blame them because they're younger, but I don't think they fully realize of just the journey this school has been on over the last couple decades plus.
Our fans have been through a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And, I'm really excited about the men's basketball stuff. I still oversee the men's basketball program as a sport administrator.
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
So I love that I get to keep that, at least for now. Who knows how long that'll last with the way NIL changes, but I hope I get to keep it. And I love that we have more Baylor staff members, more Baylor alums who are staff members now. And I'm really excited about that staff. And I think Baylor people are really the only ones who understand what it's been like. Yeah. If you've lived through it, it's hard to explain, not to go all Aggie on you, but if you haven't lived it, it's hard to explain. But I was laughing, Paul, when I came in, you were giving me a hard time for laughing. I think you were telling a Manziel story. I was actually laughing at that bootleg national championship jersey you got up on the wall there. You see that and you're like, wow, we did win a national championship in men's basketball. Like that was not fathomable. When I was a student at Baylor.
No, that's not bootleg. I took that right off of Davion Mitchell.
I don't know about that.
He gave that right to me. He said, "Paul, you've meant so much to me. I want you to have this. Obviously, this is the least valuable of all my jerseys." But it is like, I don't know. I don't even know where that came. Well, I mean,
I have a general idea.
Jack has. It was but
we need to get you an authentic one up.
Hey, we'd love it. We'd love it. Absolutely.
So, David, the last thing for me, just obviously you feel good about where things are. I guess people just always want to kind of know what's next. So just in terms of department, you guys getting on the ground running, and just kind of what are you expecting? What can people expect as far as all this goes?
Yeah, I think, you can expect that NIL is going to continue to grow. We're going to look for more and more. I sometimes use the term authentic NIL, like what people really thought NIL was intended to be, which is, trading cards, commercials, things like that. I think you're going to see more and more of that.
I think of the Kansas tight end when they beat Texas, and he gets the Applebee's. Yeah, like that was NIL, right?
R.I.P. Waco Applebee's.
Right, exactly.
So I think that stuff's going to continue to grow. You know, we're talking with Playfly, our multimedia rights partner, about essentially forming an NIL arm of Playfly Baylor Sports Properties here in Waco, focused on getting NIL deals. So we're talking with them about that. You know, there's permissibility issues, and as things evolve with the NCAA, that'll open more and more opportunities like that.
Yeah, because that would maybe lead to some cross-promotional opportunities that you would have, to where I'm ex-athlete and here's the brand I'm representing, but also they're giving money to Baylor. And like right now, those things have to be mutually exclusive because of the perception. I don't know why they do. Like, and again, like it'd be a contracted thing if you did that. So the terms would be available for like any oversight body to agree. But like, okay, well, nobody's getting screwed here. Everybody's fine. Like those are the things I expect to see down the line that would, to me, would make sense for the NCAA to allow, because then it allows the university to also capitalize on those things and make it make sense.
Well, and you talk about, you know, ways to generate extra revenue, because like revenue is the name of the game. We have to generate more. And so, you know, there's things like, wouldn't a fan be interested in purchasing the game used ball from a huge basketball win? We could probably sell that if Playfly is part of it, and that money go toward NIL funding. You know, like things like that. I think you're going to see more and more opportunities like that. You're going to see more authentic things like that. And part of, you know, Playfly out right now is going out to local sponsors and getting deals done to promote their brands as part of Baylor events. Why can't student athletes be part of that? Like, it only makes sense that the athletes playing in the game are helping to promote that. And so,
I mean, look, if you had soda pop, you know, like it's the official soda of whatever it is, and you had, I mean, we'll just use Davion Mitchell because he's gone now, but like, you know, if Davion Mitchell was still here and he could be like, you know, a picture on the wall next to the, you know, we've all been to multiple stadiums where like I've seen one, it was a baseball stadium where like literally, you know, Anthony Rizzo was in Chicago, was like reaching out, and the decal was him filling up a drink by Wrigley Field. Like that's something that benefits that athlete and benefits all the partners right there.
Yeah, those are win-win-win situations.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking for more and more of those, trying to just come up with creative solutions to give all of our student athletes opportunities, bring in more revenue for them, help us fund this beast that it's grown into, because you know, the need isn't going away. We've got to be able to fund it. And so back to your question about a model, like I'd love to see a model where, whether it's the revenue share, whatever that ends up at, or whatever it is, a model where everyone's playing on the same playing field. And this is the cap. This is what you can go to. You don't have to go to it, but let's be real. If you want to be competitive, you're going to need to go to that cap. Yeah. That would really help. So, I think you're going to see more and more as the rules get loosened and there's more clarity on what you're allowed to do. You've got different state laws you have to contend with. And so, you know, I'm not super optimistic, personal opinion again, about federal legislation.
Yeah, me neither.
But we really need it, because you need something to oversee all these different state laws. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, it's almost like daylight savings time is, I think, one thing that could unite both parties. Like, I think most people would like to keep daylight savings time. I feel like there's somewhere here that people would like to keep college sports from getting completely ridiculous. And there's got to be a middle ground there that both sides can come together and say, this just makes sense for everyone. This benefits the student athletes. It benefits the schools. It benefits the fans. That's what we need to find. And, you know, it may be after the election before that actually gets done. And we've got to work as if we're not going to get that. But hopefully that comes through and really helps us out.
I've just wondered why don't you just take the best, like the greatest hits of all the laws that make sense, and then take out the stuff that doesn't make sense, and then make that your law. Like that to me should have been the NCAA's guidance on the first thing, is like, okay, what did Florida, Texas, and California do that made this that? Let's take that law and just, this is the deal, and build from that. But they didn't do that. They kind of were like, we don't understand.
Yeah,
I know this is an oversimplification, but like at least it's a jumping off point.
I'd like to think everyone's well-intended in everything we're trying to do here. And so like there's things of, everyone started with NIL can't be used as a recruiting inducement. They didn't want offers being sent out to recruits. And that's well-intended. That seems very logical of, we don't want it to be a bidding war for recruits. But then you have to adapt to the reality of it. Like that was happening, okay? It was happening, and athletes were being taken advantage of because they were hearing some crazy number without any context behind it. And so I'm glad that the rule has changed now where collectives can put terms together for a student athlete and explain the NIL deal available to them, because that's just what's fair. So I say that to say, like, it might sound logical and this is the best or this is the worst part of the law, but you also, sometimes the people making those decisions aren't on the ground dealing with the practical reality of it.
Sometimes, all the time. Like, that's the other thing, is why they've had a bunch of hearings and people ask dumb questions at hearings, because they really don't know, because that's not their job. They have no idea, and they have a perception of what it is, and then you'll hear, like, the ridiculous things that come out of these things. And you're like, well, that wasn't productive at all, and you're not getting anywhere.
It's funny if you've ever tried to explain the American college sports model to someone in Europe. They're like, "What? Like they don't earn any income?" It's like, no, it's a scholarship, and they're very well taken care of. Like student athletes compared to 10 years ago are so much better taken care of. 20 years ago, I think back to like Shabazz Napier, and it's like things have changed so much. There's been so much deregulation, and that's honestly where a lot of the money has gone. Like people think, oh, the schools have all this money now they didn't have years ago. But a lot of it is going to student athletes through deregulation. And look, I get it. Like I'm not saying the student athletes don't deserve a greater share. I think they absolutely do. But it was funny when you tried to explain like the amateurism model of college sports, and they're like, but wait, you watch the team on TV and you root for them and you go to their games and you pay for the tickets, but the people playing the game don't make any money off
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah. So
yeah. Well, DK, this has been a great 40 minutes or so of talking. Look, it's also like these are things that we all, and the reason, we like to talk ball most of the time. That's what we do. That's what, look, you as I'm sure as an avid, media consumer yourself, I've known you for a long time, like to hear most of the time, but this is good because this is legitimately a field that none of us know a lot about. And I think I get more questions on NIL that I can't answer than anything I've had in my entire career. Like, where it's like, well, how's people like, oh, Baylor's NIL isn't good. I'm like, I don't think it's not good. I think it's fine. They're like, well, how do you know it's fine? I'm like, well, I just trust the people who told me it is, but I don't know how it works. So I can't really explain it to them and be like, oh, look, you're worrying about things that aren't really there. And that's why I was glad we were able to do this, because there's so much that you said that makes sense so much across the board that should the fans that are watching us that are, across the country, their collectives probably operate similarly to what you guys are doing, or, I'm sure there's some consistency and some wild differences depending on who you are, but what's going on, I think, is a mystery to many people.
Yeah. And I want to be aware of that. Like I wish that it didn't have to be that way, or that, I guess it doesn't have to be that way, but I understand people being frustrated with not knowing exactly how it works. And so like, I'll tell anybody, like my phone number is available for anyone to see online, 254-709-5147. Like call me, text me. It's usually easier if you text. I get a lot of unknown number calls that I don't answer. So shoot me a text, and tell me you're going to call. But I'm available to answer questions. Okay, there's going to be times I can't answer, or we just choose not to disclose some information. But if I can, I will, and I'll try to explain it the best I can. But yeah, it's just I hate that part of it. I wish that everyone understood it and everyone was on the same page. But again, I understand like competitively.
I get it. Like it's kind of like there's some things in the government that need to be secret. There's some things that don't. And then like those things that don't make sense is like, why was this a secret in the first place? And I think that's the way I think a lot of people feel about NIL. It's like, like I get like not wanting to say, like, especially now when there's no rules on the cap of things. Yeah. So like if school finds out that Baylor's spending this much and like, well, we have that more money than that, let's make sure we put schools like that in the ground. Well, then that hurts you guys. So I understand that being secret. I think knowing about the process is a lot more illuminating to where it doesn't like, it seems so haphazard the first couple of years of NIL.
I understand that. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people felt that way. I think we were very intentional to be intentional, for lack of a better word, about the way we approach things. And so it was maybe a little slow off the ground, but that was by design. And you evolve and you adapt and you're able to see mistakes other people are making and avoid those on the front end. But yeah, I hope that this is at least somewhat illuminating for people in the process and the way it works. And but at the same time, understand a month from now the process might be a little different because the rules are going to change. Yeah. But I can't say enough good things about our NIL Advisory Council, those high-level donors, Mac, Jovan, our fundraisers, all of the donors who help us to make this thing happen. I hope that they trust that we all have Baylor's best interest at heart. And you don't have to agree with every decision we make. I'm sure you don't. But we're trying like crazy to make Baylor competitive in everything.
DK, love you, buddy. Great to see you as always. It's been a while. I haven't seen you in like months.
I think, on the show in your
in the house
attic.
In the house
back in the day. That was summer of 2020. So it's been a while.
Interesting times back then.
It was interesting times. Yeah, no, that was wild to go back there. I was looking at a picture the other day of like how it used to be set up there, and now I'm married and the house looks completely different because I have no control over that.
Well, that's for the best.
It's for the best. Like it wasn't, I realized I wasn't living in a Shangri-La.